Now, Marc Lamont Hill, you may remember him. He was on the Factor a bunch of times, a very fiery left wing progressive African American. He's got a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, so Hill's a smart guy. He knows the world, and he is taking a very devoted left wing position. I like debating with Hill because it's a good back and forth. And I talked to him yesterday. So I just set you up with a poll, Gallup poll, that shows a tremendous deterioration in black-white American race relations in 20 years. Why do you think that's happened?
There are a lot of reasons why people over the last 20 years have lost faith in American racial possibilities and racial progress. One is they've seen through the use of cell phones, through the use of social media, they've seen so many Black people killed. They've seen so many people killed by law enforcement. They've seen so many protests and so many marches without any real sense that things have gotten better. They have they lived in the Obama era, which for many people was the promise of a post-racial America, the promise that the world would get better. And from 2008 until 2016, there was some progress on some fronts, but on the racial front, we would say no. There's a lot more honest and raw conversation about race taking place, and I think it's created a sense of possibility on the one hand, but in many ways, it's made people say, "Hey, this isn't going well for us." I don't believe that race is a solvable problem in America.
All right. I think your point about seeing on video police brutality against African Americans does exacerbate race relations. I don't think Obama had anything to do with it. He did the best he could, I thought, to try to improve race relations. He wasn't a bomb thrower, provocateur. But you have, in the African American community, made tremendous economic strides in 20 years. Much better off in 2021 than the African American crew was in 2001. And if you look at the police brutality stats, and I'm sure you have, they're not saying that there's a tremendous amount of police brutality directed at African Americans, but the hype of it all, when a George Floyd goes down, that, I think, is the driver of the division. Am I wrong?
Well, first, let me say it's always a good day for me when I'm criticizing Obama and you're defending him. That just it does my heart well. You're really growing over the years. You're getting warmer and fuzzier here for me.
I know, yeah.
but I think that there is I do think there's something to be said about the police brutality stats. You know, all the data shows that while Black and white people, according to a lot of the studies, are equally likely to be killed by the police, or really equally unlikely to be killed by the police, when we look at the level of physicality, the level of brutality in interactions, Black people are on the high end of it. Now, you could go your whole life without being roughed up by a cop. Most Black people will. But most Black people will also tell you that they've had a bad experience. They've had that they have a fear. And that fear gets amplified by social media, no doubt. But I don't want to frame it as like much ado about nothing, or that this is some creation of new media.
But here's a much more intense fear on the part of African Americans, and that's getting murdered by another African American. The stats are unbelievable. So according to the FBI, 89% of Black murder victims were killed by other Blacks. And African Americans account for 44% of all murder victims in the USA, okay? And they're only 14% of the population. So I would put forth that, yes, many Blacks have a fear of the police, and maybe most of them have had a bad experience with the police. I'll absolutely admit that. But the big fear is getting murdered by another African American, is it not?
It is not. I can tell you, as I've been Black a really long time, that is not my biggest fear. Now, you're
maybe not you, but somebody living in a poor neighborhood that's rife with crime, drug gangs running wild. You don't think they're afraid of getting hurt by those people?
Of course, people are, and I still live in a poor neighborhood. You know, I stay with the community, but I think that there's a very real stat that you're pointing out. there's a gap between, maybe what you should say is that maybe Black people should be more afraid of the kind of internecine crime you're talking about. But when you ask Black people what they're afraid of, they're not afraid of other Black people. Now, are Black people cautious and smart and wise navigating the streets? Of course, we all should be. But I think that the fear of police is a different one, and I'll tell you why. Oh, actually, let me back up and tell you one other thing. You're right, 89% of Black people are killed by other Black people, but that's a proximity crime. Most white people are killed by other white people. Now, your stat about the proportion, 40% to the 13, I think is a different thing. But I don't want to frame Black people being killed by Black people as some unique pathology of Black people, but rather Asian groups, white groups, they all kill each other at about the same rate.
But not at that rate. The proportion of murders committed by African Americans is far beyond any other group in America, far beyond.
That's a different issue. Again, I conceded the point that Black people are overrepresented in terms of being murder victims. I conceded that point. But what I'm saying is the fact that most Black people are killed by other Black people, I'm saying, is in line with white people. Most the person most likely to kill me is a Black person. The person most likely to kill you, other than maybe somebody at MSNBC, is another white person.
Okay. But the fact remains that 14% of the population is responsible for 44% of the homicides. That's way out of whack.
The reason why race relations are fraying, and the reason why Black people are losing faith in the possibility of racial justice in America, is not because of quote unquote Black on Black crime. It's because of the type of injustices that we see from white people and from white law enforcement in particular, among other issues. And this is a very important point, Bill. When a gang shoots me, if a gang member shoots me, I had no good faith belief that the Crips or the Bloods or the gangster disciples were supposed to protect me. But also, when a Black person shoots me, I have every reason to believe they're going to be arrested, they're going to be charged, they're going to be convicted, and they're going to get a long sentence.
Not in Chicago. Those stats are now crumbling. All right, let's get on to.
But I need you to hear this point. Hear this point out, Bill. Just right. Fast. My point is that when the police shoot me, it frays the social contract. When I don't get justice from a police officer, it makes me lose trust in the system. My faith in the system doesn't hinge on gang members treating me good. It hinges on the people paid to protect and serve me.
People in power to give you a fair shot is a fair point. Okay, it's a fair point. But I'm trying to get to the root of the division that is widening between whites and Blacks. And part of the reason is the horrific level of violence in the African American community, which I believe, and this is our last topic for you, stems from the dissolution of the family. So again, the stats are horrific, with more than 70% of babies, African American babies, born out of wedlock. And for the whites, it's half that. And so you have almost chaos in the social fabric in many African American neighborhoods because there's no dad. And you're a dad. You know how important being a dad is. There's no dad. And that isn't being addressed in any high-profile way by whites or Blacks in America, as far as I can see.
I would say the exact opposite. I can't look at a conservative conversation and not hear about absentee fathers and the broken Black family.
Because that's the genesis of the problem. The genesis of the problem is that. That's where it begins. The education.
I disagree, but so there's two things here. The first thing for me is that I'm always fascinated at how the right loves colorblind policy. They love to not talk about race unless they're talking about dysfunctional Black neighborhoods. Then race becomes the most important thing to name. So it's an interesting conversation to have. That said,
but that's not me. You've been talking to me for more than a decade. That's not me.
Yeah, but
I'm willing to talk about any aspect of the race situation. I wanted to get better.
Right, and in the same way that when we're talking about Black people's fear, we're not talking about me. We're talking about the broader world who aren't as wise as you or I, Bill. But the idea here is, one, the source of Black fatherlessness, as we talk about it, is not, again, we have to talk about those sources. It's easy to say Black fathers aren't in the house, but many Black fathers who aren't in the house or near the house aren't there because of joblessness. They're not there because of mass incarceration over the last 50 years. There are reasons structurally that pull people away that aren't about individual choice. But the other thing we have to think about is just because people aren't married doesn't mean that they're not active and involved. Black non-custodial fathers are actually the most involved. So even when Black people aren't married, they might not live in the house, but they still come to the house. They still parent their children. But again, if we're going to look at the genesis of the problem, I want to look at those neighborhoods where Black men got 40 years for drug penalties, where other people got 5 or 6. And then we say, look, there are no, as we call them, OGs in the neighborhood to help people resolve disputes. So when you see young people killing each other, part of it is because the men in the neighborhood have been taken away. When people say they're fatherless, part of it is irresponsibility. I wouldn't doubt that, but a lot of it is structural. So we have to, if we're going to fix this, we got to go to the source of the problem.
Some of it is structural, but when you have a 70% out of wedlock birth rate, and I'll make one last point and give you the last word. In the 1960s, there was a low fatherless rate in the United States, and the criminal justice system was worse then toward African Americans than it is now. But the family unit in African American areas was more intact. The tradition was we stay together. And the crime rate for African Americans in the 60s was much, much lower. Then it exploded in the 80s and 90s with crack. And a lot of the people you don't want sent away for a long time destroyed thousands of lives. Thousands of lives. And you know that. Because some of your friends, just like some of my friends, succumbed to the narcotics. But anyway, when the family unit was intact for African Americans, all right, their crime rate was much, much lower. Last word.
First, let's not romanticize the past. Part of the reason Black people hung together and stuck together and stayed in the same neighborhoods and stayed in the same houses was because we couldn't live anywhere else. We weren't allowed to do anything else. Jim Crow was a big factor in that. And then you raised an interesting point from the crime rise in the 1960s until now. Bill, the rise in crime is because of the rise in criminalization. When you look at from Nixon forward, the war on drugs begins when? In the 1960s. So of course, crime goes up. More things became a crime. If I take the law book and I thicken it and say you can get in trouble for more stuff, and drugs, as you pointed out, infiltrate the neighborhoods, then yes, more people will get caught for stuff. Yes, more people will go to prison, but it's not because we lost our moral compass. It's because there was a very concerted effort and focus on taking Black people and criminalizing them, and taking poor white people and criminalizing them.
There were an awful lot of...
The difference is my friends that got locked up are still away, and your friends who got locked up were able to come home.
I don't have any friends who got locked up. I mean, I got to tell you, we'll talk about this some other time, but in my neighborhood, Levittown, if you were a dope dealer, you were the lowest scum of the earth. Everybody it was disgusting. Now it's different. So the peer pressure in my neighborhood was send those guys away. Marc Lamont Hill, very smart, honest guy. I've known him forever. And if Hill and O'Reilly can have a civil conversation about race, anybody can. Is that true?
That is 100% true.
All right. So Hill firmly believes that, police go out and look for Black people to arrest and put them in jail and all that. There's some of that. There are racist cops. All right. There are. But they're a very small percentage of the 88,000 law enforcement. Look, when you have a murder rate, 44% of all the murders in USA are committed by African Americans. They're 14% of the population. They commit 44% of the murders. And 89% of the people killed are African Americans. They're killing their own. And when you have that, you're going to have more people arrested for violent crimes. Narcotics sold on the streets. And I'm not going to say primarily because there are a lot of people involved in the narcotics business. But in certain neighborhoods, all Black and it's all Hispanic. And there are few neighborhoods, not many, where it's white. Now, if you're going to sell narcotics on the street, you're going to get popped. Okay? You're going to get popped. And with the crack stuff that destroyed millions of lives, yeah, they put him in jail for a long time. They're selling this poison. But was it aimed at trying to destroy the fabric of African-American society? No, it was not. It was actually aimed at protecting African Americans from crack dealers and heroin dealers. But Marc Lamont Hill will never, ever in a million years see that. And that's a obviously source of disagreement. Hey, I'm sure you've noticed that everything is getting more expensive, and with all this printing money and spending by the progressives, I'm concerned the dollar's end could be near. If the government continues this way, the dollar could freefall and lose its coveted role as the world's reserve currency. That's why there's never been a more important time to consider gold and silver to protect you and your family. And American Hartford Gold is the only company I'm happy to put my name behind. I have done business with them myself. It just takes a quick phone call and they'll have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or put inside your IRA. Plus, tell them Bill O'Reilly sent you and they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver on your first order. So please don't wait. Call 866-501-5201, 866-501-5201, or text BILL to 65532. Again, 866-501-5201, or text BILL to 65532. Bill O'Reilly here. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure you subscribe to the First TV YouTube page. Just hit the big red subscribe button below, and you'll get clips and highlights of my program, The No Spin News, every single day. We'll see you soon.